So yesterday, if you recall, we reported on Puerto Rico and the fact that the Trump administration had refused to waive or suspend the Jones Act, which would allow for non-U.S. flag ships to go through their shipping ports and deliver supplies. Now, as of today, President Donald Trump, has done the right thing. The White House has authorized a waiver to loosen shipping rules regarding Puerto Rico that island officials say would be a significant help for recovery efforts from Hurricane Maria. Acting Department of Homeland Security Secretary Elaine Duke said the waiver will be in effect for 10 days and will cover all products being shipped to Puerto Rico, according to a release from the department. After a 10-day period, the waiver can be extended if needed. DHS spokesman David LePan told CNN. He said the waiver was approved after it was determined that doing so would be in the interest of national defense. Once again, this is a very outdated law that was put in place during World War I. That's why the Department of Homeland Security has jurisdiction over it. It doesn't make a ton of sense, I know, but ships back in World War I were a part of the national defense. I mean, they still are, but that's why, again, the wording, the bureaucracy is a bit outdated. Again, it's an 100-year-old provision. So Trump did do the right thing. He explained his hesitation yesterday, saying a lot of people that work in the shipping industry don't want the Jones Act lifted. Very telling. Trump and his cronies, the swampy people who live in his administration, live in the swamp, are money people. I mean, Gary Cohn, Steve Mnuchin of One West Bank, which did criminal things during the housing crisis. They are all the swamp that Trump said he would drain, and they are pro-business, pro-enriching themselves. That's why they always think of industry before people. But we have to commend the Trump administration for doing the right thing. I'm glad. Okay. I mean, I'm just trying to give a little bit of credit because we don't want to do damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I'll continue. From Jose Fuentes, chairman of the Puerto Rico Statehood Council, he said, hospitals are running with generators. Frozen food warehouses are running on generators. They need to get diesel if we want to keep that food. So they need oil and fuel to be delivered to the island. The act was quickly lifted to help Texas and Florida, the Jones Act, in the wake of Hurricanes Harvey and Irma. The Department of Homeland Security said it was able to lift the restrictions quickly because the Department of Defense requested a waiver for those states, and the department hadn't yet done so for Puerto Rico. That's very important. So the Department of Homeland Security was using an excuse saying, well, the Department of Defense hasn't requested this. They're all a part of the same Trump administration. If they had actually wanted to do so for Puerto Rico, they could have easily just spoken to their buddies at the Department of Defense. You know, Homeland Security and Defense, they kind of interact a little bit, and had this waiver expedited, or this request expedited for Puerto Rico. They didn't do it because Trump cares about Texas, he cares about Florida, he cares a lot less about Puerto Rico. Next, Congress will take up the issue of a hurricane relief package for Puerto Rico, or maybe not. Politico reports that a formal funding request is still weeks away, as the devastation in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands is so widespread that an assessment cannot be made. Still, Congress passed a major hurricane relief package just 6 days after Hurricane Harvey struck Texas, and the government relaxed the Jones Act to deal with the Exxon Valdez oil spill, an ecological tragedy, but far from a human catastrophe. So let's just talk a little bit about that, and then we can continue reading more into how Puerto Rico has little representation in the United States government. But I guess my first reaction is I do want to give the Trump administration credit for doing this, but I think it's so obvious that without public pressure and somehow people understanding what the Jones Act was, and the added hypocrisy of what he did for Texas and what he did for Florida, but not for Puerto Rico, they wouldn't have done it. And, I saw a tweet today that said after Japan's earthquake, President Obama, sent an aircraft carrier over to there within a day. It shows the differences in priorities and the extreme lack of empathy that the Trump administration displays on a consistent basis.
Well, I mean, bottom line, just look at the quote. What did he say? A lot of people that work in the shipping industry don't want the Jones Act lifted. Well, I heard a rumor that a lot of people who live in Puerto Rico want to live. So what's more important, the shipping industry and their needs, or people that, according to Mr. Fuentes, hospitals are running with generators, frozen food warehouses running on generators. They need to get diesel if we want to keep that food. I've done interviews. People with diabetes can't get access to insulin. People on dialysis, their machines have no power. Yet we need to worry about the shipping industry. This is the dangers. I'm not totally anti a business person being a politician, but this is the danger when you have people, besides the fact that he's an idiot, when you have people thinking business first, when you have people thinking, economic conditions first, frankly, when you have people thinking corporate welfare first, as opposed to people. Right now, the shipping industries, short-term, American ships being the only ones that come in, their short-term profits or business is not as important as humanitarian aid in a crisis. Because right now is for a large swath of the people, there's still chance to save lives. And what you don't see on CNN or any of these places, and for the most part, most of them are actually covering it extensively, so credit where credit is due, but there are people showing up dead in other people's homes. Puerto Rico has very little shade. It's over 80 degrees there every day with a lot of humidity, and there's not enough water. There's not enough food. So the fact, if you want to give him credit after a lot of pressure, okay, but this should have been done pretty much immediately. There should be no separate standard for Puerto Rico versus Texas and Florida, and this goes to the issue of statehood, which is a separate issue from the hurricane, but it goes hand in hand. Puerto Rico, like Guam and other territories, are non-voting members of Congress. So the decisions on relief aid, a lot of different things, they will not have a say as they're voted on. It's also, they're talking about that it's going to take 2 weeks to vote on a relief package. 2 weeks. What are they doing? I understand they had a very nice ceremony and they clapped today for Congressman Steve Scalise, who came back from a gunshot wound. That's fine. But what are you doing? What is more important right now than humanitarian relief? It hasn't moved from rescue to recovery. You're still in the rescue mode. So why is it that it's going to take 2 weeks for relief aid to these poor people? And secondly, this should have never been the case that it took public pressure to make an exception. Nobody was worried about the economic for ships or other things when it came to Texas and Florida. So not only is this a case, in my view, of racism, Puerto Rico is minority, but secondly, it's this mindset, America first and business first and jobs first. Well, those things need to be tossed aside when you're dealing with life or death.
I would also add on that we have this kind of sickness in this country where capitalism is our religion. That's what has been...
We're capitalists. That's it, Nancy Pelosi.
Oh, right. Exactly. But it's been ingrained in the American psyche to the point that, even if you say I'm a socialist, you got to apologize for it. You got to say, business is good, greed is good. To the point where the Supreme Court in Buckley v. Vallejo and in Bellotti in the 1976 and 78, respectively, said that corporations have personhood rights. And it is embodied by the Trump administration, by the greed in the Trump administration, so that when you see human lives and people chalking SOS into the gravel so that planes overhead can see we need help, you are thinking first about the shipping industry's short-term profits. That's a sickness. It is a warped brain that we've been infected with, or our brains have been infected with since we grew up, and we have to shake that mentality. I think politicians like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are doing a lot to shake that mentality, but nothing... The Trump administration embodies that sickness better than anything in this country. I just want to continue talking about what Puerto Rico is going to need going forward, and the fact that they don't have a voice in our Congress makes this extremely troubling and scary that they may not get that relief. Puerto Rico will have no real say in whatever decision Congress makes. The stakes could not be higher. One estimate pegs hurricane damage at more than $72 billion. That's amazing. Not in the good way. Maria came just a month after Puerto Rico declared a soft bankruptcy in May following a debt crisis that Fuentes and other critics say was spurred in large part to Puerto Rico's inequitable standing vis-a-vis the rest of the country. It's possible that the damage wrought by Maria could even exceed the debt that ruined the island financially. What we talked about yesterday is that the Jones Act, the very one that Trump needed to wouldn't suspend until he had to do it kicking and screaming, has cost the nations of Puerto Rico, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico's economy, billions of dollars. Some estimates range from $2 to, I believe, $6 billion a year for including Hawaii and Alaska, because Puerto Rico is a commonwealth. They don't want them essentially having their own trade and associating with governments outside of the United States sanctioned ships and trading situations. So this hamstrings them and cuts into their economic development because they can only do it when, big brother U.S. says they can trade with certain countries. And since 85% of their economy is based on importation, this raises prices. This forces them into an economic stranglehold that has contributed to their debt. And now Trump is blaming them for that debt when it is literally the condition of their oppression that debt has accrued. It's this constant victim blaming that you see not only in the Trump administration, but throughout the country, especially in conservative movements.
And can you share videos on YouTube? I know I sound like a 95-year-old grandpa. Because on Facebook, I say share the video. You could press the share button here, right?
You'd have to share it on a social media
platform. Okay, share the video. Let's get this out there so more people. We're going to start doing this more often, but I don't know if everybody knows. Emma and I are live right now, so let's press the share button, get it out there. I will close with this in terms of Puerto Rico. The bottom line is, as I always say in Flint and other places, you might not live in Puerto Rico, you might not be Puerto Rican, it might be very far away from you, but this matters because these climate change induced, they're not created by climate change, but these storms that are becoming more and more deadly and happening more and more periodically, they're not going to stop only for Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands, which I didn't mention yesterday, or Texas or Florida. If you would have told people in New York 5 years ago that a storm like Sandy could have done the destruction it did, people would have said, oh, we don't have storms like that. So these kinds of storms can and will be coming to you because we have an administration now who is asleep at the switch. And through idiocy and, in my view, playing to a base, are pretty much just recklessly tossing climate change aside. But it's not just because the people are a minority in Puerto Rico, it's because they're poor. There is a different standard and a different emergency relief effort if you are white and wealthier or upper middle class versus poor, impoverished, and as Trump says, on an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Derogatorily, in my opinion. So it's very important that you show your support for Puerto Rico. Also, we've put up videos on the channel. In the description, we have some donation links that I personally trust. Everybody make your own decisions, but I personally looked into them and think they're reputable. So definitely check it out, and we'll keep reporting. Obviously, there is definitely a need for gas, water, food, supplies, and I hate to say thoughts and prayers, but at this point, that's the only thing really we could do in addition to making people aware.